morning, Bucknutters. Welcome to the Bucknuts Morning 5 here on Friday, December 2nd, 2016. I am Dave Biddle, very happy to be joined by Brandon Castel. Brandon, the beat goes on for Ohio State recruiting. It's amazing. They landed Baron Browning, five-star linebacker Baron Browning yesterday from Texas, and this makes 6 five-star recruits in Ohio State's class, and they only have 16 commitments in the class. It's just an amazing ratio. 6 5-stars, 16 recruits in the class, and they're not done. They're going to get Jeffrey Okudah. They're in on many other top prospects. By comparison, Brandon, Michigan right now has a class of 20. They have 0 5-stars. I mean, just when I think Urban Meyer and his staff, Mark Pantoni, the assistant coaches, just when I think they can't take it to the next level, BCAS, that's exactly what they do.
Yeah, exactly. It's amazing when you think about the recruiting classes that they put together at Ohio State. I mean, going back even to really the first class, but every year it just seems like, okay, this group is even better than the group we had last year come in, and you know, so it's pretty remarkable when you see what they're able to do, and obviously, you know, the rankings may not be exactly how everyone is viewing these kids, but really it's unbelievable the way they're able to go out and get the kids that they're going after. I mean, obviously, you know, that's the key, is that they're not missing on these kids. I mean, especially the kids from out of state. You look at a kid in Baron Browning, who a lot of people had pegged to go to Alabama. He comes and visits Ohio State for the game. And, you know, all of a sudden you've got, you know, one of the top 2 or 3 kids in the state of Texas now that's going to make his way up to Columbus and play football at Ohio State. You've got a bunch of kids in the state of Florida already in this class, and Grimes and Wade and some of the other top kids in the state. You've got Dobbins out of Texas. You've got, obviously, the kids out of Bishop Gorman in Nevada. And, you know, they could end up with another kid out of that group. So, it's pretty remarkable, especially if they are able to go out and get a couple of these other kids that you're talking about with Okudah, and if they're able to go out and get a kid like Trey Smith. I mean, pretty amazing what they've already been able to do. I mean, as you mentioned with Michigan, they've got 8 or 9 kids in this class that, you know, according to 24/7, are rated higher than anyone in Michigan's class. And that's not entirely surprising. I mean, considering where Ohio State has been and the momentum they've built, you know, in the last 5 years, really, with Urban Meyer and Columbus. But it just shows you kind of the difference between an Urban Meyer and a Nick Saban and really the rest of the country. Even Jim Harbaugh at Michigan, you know, I do think he's one of the better recruiters and will put together some really good classes in Ann Arbor, but they're nowhere close right now to the level of what Ohio State is doing with some of these kids, and the way they're able to go into these other states and land really the top players in the state. I mean, it's pretty remarkable. If you look at Michigan's class, it's interesting where they're getting recruits from. It's a lot of the East Coast, kind of New Hampshire, Connecticut. You know, they got the top kid in the state of New Mexico, but really not kind of the same level of traditional powerhouse recruiting states that you would consider when you look at Ohio State.
It's amazing that Ohio State not playing in the Big Ten championship game is so good for Ohio State this year. I mean, I don't think we're ever going to see a year like this again, when it actually helps a team to not play in the Big Ten championship game. And we've talked about the reasons, like, for on the field. You know, they don't have to risk injury. They don't have to play in another violent football game and risk serious injury to one of their players or multiple players. They don't have to risk losing to Wisconsin, which would knock them out of the playoff, in my opinion. Maybe a 2-loss Ohio State would get in if they're losing the Big Ten championship game, but maybe they wouldn't. Right now they're a lock. Furthermore, it helps with recruiting. I mean, the coaching staff is all in on recruiting this week, and I think they would have got Baron Browning regardless, but, you know, now they're the favorite to land Pete Werner, the outstanding linebacker from Indianapolis. You know, instead of dealing with the media this week, instead of dealing with getting their team ready to play in the Big Ten championship game this week, they're doing nothing but recruiting. I mean, talking to the SID, Jerry Emig, they didn't have media obligations this week because the entire staff is out recruiting. I mean, this is amazing to me, BCAS, that for all the reasons I just mentioned, that not playing in the Big Ten championship game, including recruiting, it's helping the Buckeyes.
Yeah, I mean, it is remarkable, and I think the key is because they're coming off that big win. You know, it'd be one thing if you're coming off a loss and you're saying, all right, we're going to go out and do some recruiting this week because we're not playing in the Big Ten championship game. I mean, that, you know, there's an offset there because those kids are going to be watching that game on Saturday. They're going to watch. A lot of those kids will be watching, especially if an Ohio State or a Michigan was playing in that game. So you do gain some kind of positive national momentum when you play in those kind of games. But Ohio State just played in one of the most televised college football games we've ever seen. And they just played in, one of the most high profile games in a 2 versus 3 with everyone watching, certainly all these kids who are considering Ohio State or considering Michigan or considering, one of these major schools were watching that game. And so you can't have asked for a better storyline if you're Urban Meyer than to go out to have a monster recruiting weekend, have all these kids come in for the game, have a kid like Baron Browning there to watch them win a dramatic game in double overtime, seal really their fate to be a part of the college football playoff, and then be able to kind of, again, to your point, take a week off with everyone kind of in the back of their mind saying, yeah, Ohio State is one of the 4 best teams in the country. I'm not even going to worry about what happens on Saturday, and be able to go out, recruit these kids, talk about the game, and build off of that momentum. It's, of course, only an Urban Meyer and Nick Saban really have been able to pull off, these types of situations where they're so good that they kind of get the best of both worlds. It usually doesn't work that way.
We're about 48 hours away from the official college football playoff rankings coming out. The only ones that really matter, the final college football playoff rankings will be released around noon on Sunday. They might milk it. It might not be released till about 12:30 on Sunday, but we will know early Sunday afternoon who the 4 teams are. Give me your prediction, 1 through 4. Who's going to make the college football playoff, Brandon?
Yeah, it's a good question because I'm going off of some assumptions, some assumptions of what we've heard from the committee, what we've seen in the past, what generally there seems to be a consensus on. And so a couple of weeks ago, if you were to go back and ask me this question, I had some doubts on whether the committee would really put in a non-conference champion. They hadn't done it yet. It kind of seemed like, if Michigan got in, won the championship, they were a lock. But, from there were some question marks in my mind. But as time's gone on, I've heard the committee talk. I've seen what the committee has done in terms of, after the Ohio State-Michigan game, at keeping Ohio State at 2 or putting Michigan at 3 and really only dropping them back a few spots when they lost. To me, the committee has shown their hand a little bit that they are absolutely looking for the 4 best teams in the country, and that may not necessarily, by the way they position Ohio State, Michigan, Wisconsin, in the rankings, that may not necessarily mean they have to be a conference champion. And so I'm with you. I think Ohio State is in. I think Alabama is in, and I think the rest will be decided on Saturday. I do think Clemson will beat Virginia Tech and will get in. And I think those will be your top 3 teams. I don't know whether Ohio State will be 2 or 3. I don't think it really matters. I think, Clemson and Ohio State will probably both end up playing each other, in the Fiesta Bowl. But I think that 4th spot is really what it comes down to. Are they going to put a team like Michigan in, that has 2 losses, but both losses, tough road losses? And, are they going to look at a team like Washington? I mean, obviously if Washington goes out and just wipes the floor with Colorado, I think it's going to be hard for them to ignore everything that happens on Saturday. I don't think the committee can say we're not even going to watch championship Saturday. We're just going to check the box score and make sure the teams that we think are the best won. I do think that what happens on Saturday will matter. So I think what can sway them is if Washington comes out and really takes care of business and runs over Colorado, or if Wisconsin comes out and takes care of business and really runs over Penn State. I think those are the 2 teams. If one of those 2 teams look really, really impressive on Saturday, I think they'll get the last spot. Penn State, I'm not as sure. I don't think everybody really puts Penn State in the same conversation as the rest of these teams because they already have 2 losses. They got blown out by Michigan earlier in the year. I don't think they'll be on the same playing field, but I think that really it's going to come down to Washington and Wisconsin. If both of those teams struggle and they don't look impressive, and there's some real questions about, who that 4th team is, it opens the door maybe for a Michigan to sneak in on the outside, but I don't see that happening.
We have college football tonight. We have the MAC championship game, ESPN2, 7 o'clock, undefeated Western Michigan against Frank Solich and the Ohio Bobcats. And then after that, well, not really after that, just a couple hours after kickoff of the MAC championship game, we have the Pac-12 championship game, 9 p.m. tonight Eastern time on Fox, Colorado against Washington. Let me ask you this about Washington. You kind of touched on this. Let's say tonight Washington wins. It's not a last-second field goal. It's not like they win by 1 point. Let's say they win by 7. I think the point spread's like 7.5. So they don't blow out Colorado, but they also don't win by a last-second field goal. But they win by a touchdown. If they win by a touchdown tonight, is Washington definitely in? Or do you think that opens the door, like you said, for maybe a Michigan or even the Big Ten champ?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it opens the door for sure. I think that's the kind of situation that would open the door. Now, I mean, I think Washington has done everything they can do. You know, they've looked very impressive for most of the season. You know, they went out last week and they really, you know, I think a lot of people, you know, if you were watching, some of the pundits were predicting an upset, that Washington State was going to be the team to knock them off. Obviously, they lost that game earlier at home to USC, and that kind of rings heavy since they only scored 13 points. But they came back, you know, in the last couple of weeks, put up 44 against Arizona State and then 45 against Washington State. I think the committee is kind of waiting to see, you know, what is this Washington team all about? And Colorado is a top 10 team. Colorado just took care of Utah pretty handedly. And, you know, I think that game is going to be a big factor, that if they don't win that game handedly, I think it absolutely opens the door, especially because Michigan already beat Colorado earlier in the year. I think it leaves some room for the committee to say, you know what, even though Washington's the champ, they just didn't do enough to show us they're one of the 4 best in the country. If they come out and blow the doors off Colorado tonight, it's going to be really hard to leave them out of the Final Four. But if not, I think all bets are off.
Before I let you go, this is not an Ohio State-related topic. I mean, it kind of is, since Indiana's in the same division as Ohio State in the Big Ten East. But I'm intrigued with what's going on over in Bloomington. They fired Kevin Wilson. I have to admit, my immediate reaction was, what are they doing? Like, this is Bill Mallory Part 2. Like, why would you fire Kevin Wilson? But it turns out it's like a Tim Beckman situation, that there could be some, at least allegations of player abuse or whatever you want to call it. I want you to speak on that. But also, I'm not a fan, BCast, of promoting from within when you have a head coaching vacancy like this. I think Indiana should have had a national search. Now, they promoted defensive coordinator Tom Allen. I will say, in his defense, I was very impressed. They brought him in this year. Indiana went from a terrible defense to at least an average defense, which for them is like really, really good. And he did it in 1 year. So I get why people are high on him, because he really did a good job as defensive coordinator. But I'm not a fan of promoting, in this situation, the defensive coordinator to head coach of Indiana's program. Just a couple. I mean, they were on the right track with Kevin Wilson. It seemed like 2 straight bowl wins, or 2 straight bowl seasons, I should say. They get rid of him. They promote the defensive coordinator. Just your thoughts on that whole situation.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate situation because, you know, I think the Big Ten obviously has really turned the corner as a conference, and you're starting to see, you know, obviously Michigan being quote unquote back under Jim Harbaugh has been a big part of that. Penn State coming back this year under Franklin has been a big part of that as well. And I think that, you know, Indiana was one of those teams that could really boost the kind of status of the conference overall, because Kevin Wilson, I think everyone around the country had respect for him as a football coach, that he, at least as an offensive football coach, that, you know, that he was a guy who knew what he was doing. If he ever got the right talent, you know, that he could be a force. There seemed to be kind of a mutual respect around the country for him, you know, going back to his days at Oklahoma and all that. So I, again, was with you, shocked and a little disappointed that they had to let him go. Obviously not reading now what we've been told, but at the time I'm disappointed because I felt like here's a chance for the Big Ten to have some of these lower level teams, the Illinois, Indiana's, Purdue's, you know, Minnesota's, Rutgers, you know, for those teams to raise their status by having, you know, good football coaches. And I know we've had this conversation before that the Big Ten, in my opinion, over the last 10 to 15 years has lacked good football coaches outside of, you know, the few premier programs. So, you know, I'm with you. Obviously, it's a bad situation, it sounds like, you know, especially with putting kids back on the field if they had concussion symptoms and ignoring a lot of the safety issues that we're seeing in the game today. There's no room for that. If that's true, then obviously you got to part ways with a guy like Kevin Wilson, and no questions about it. But yeah, I'm with you. I think Tom Allen did a really good job this year. I think he's probably a pretty good football coach. But I don't know that necessarily makes you a great head coach. And, I don't know. I just felt like Indiana had some momentum, like you said, going to back-to-back bowls. They could have at least opened up the coaching search to say, we're going to consider Tom Allen, but we're also going to see who else might be out there, you know, who else might be interested, who else might think Kevin Wilson had laid a good foundation to be able to come in and you know, do some stuff at Indiana that hasn't been done in a while and not just go back to being Indiana football. But we'll see. Not going to take anything away from him now, but I think it was probably a unique situation with Kevin Wilson. I don't expect them to continue, you know, being at that level or kind of trending upwards the way that they were.
Yeah, it reeks of laziness. As you mentioned, they, at least should have done, even if they like Tom Allen, why not open it up and make sure? Was Tom Allen going to leave? I mean, he knows he has a chance to be Indiana's head coach. I think you have to, if you're the AD there, you have to have a national search. You can't just be lazy and say, oh, we're just going to promote the defensive coordinator. To me, it just reeks of laziness. But hopefully, for the Big Ten's sake, I am wrong, and Tom Allen will do a good job over there at Indiana. Maybe he'll hire a excellent offensive coordinator and they won't miss a beat, but we'll see what happens. Maybe they'll be even better now that they have a guy that actually can coach some defense leading the program. Great stuff as always out of Brandon Castel. Really appreciate it, BCast. And thanks to all listeners out there for tuning into the show. I hope you have a great day and a great weekend. Let's hear some Buckeye swag. Best damn band in the land.